The biggest stories of 2024. We are here to talk about them right now. Looking back on the year, this hopefully will be some fun listening for you, kind of maybe in the midst of your holiday travels. Let me and my good friend Andrew Udarian, who I texted this morning and said, do you want to talk about the biggest e-commerce story in 2024? Udarian has some of the clearest perspective of anybody on the current e-commerce space because he is the founder and CEO of Ecommerce Fuel. So he is constantly in the mix with many, many more e-commerce brands than I am. How you doing, Andrew?
Great. Thanks, Mr. Ferris. And by clearest perspective, you mean there was 4 other people you asked, nobody could make it on short notice, and I had nothing going on this afternoon. But I am, regardless, stoked to be here to do this. So this will be fun. Thanks for having me.
No, I racked my brain thinking, like, who do I want to do, like, wide sweep of the landscape with? And I thought, like, you do. I mean, tell people about e-commerce, like, how many people are in Ecommerce Fuel, or what can you say about sort of the size of the community? Because it's 7 and 8 figure store owners.
Mm-hmm. I have about 1,000 members, ballpark, and 7, 8 figure and some 9 figure stores, and it's a good barometer, I think, for what's going on. So
so you have a broader mix than just like who I see tweeting, which is probably not that fair of a mix, you know. So all right, everybody should right now stop what they're doing and go join Ecommerce Fuel. It's the best. I've been in it for a long time. It's fantastic, and Ecommerce Live is the best conference in the game. So it's like the only one I try to go out of my way to go to. So there you go.
Thanks,
Udarian, let's talk about the biggest e-commerce stories of the year. I have 8 that I would really like to get to. We'll see how much time we have, and then maybe some rapid fires at the end. But let's start with inflation. This is sort of the obvious one, I think, because it is the biggest macroeconomic issue in our space. So inflation slowdown and the Fed cutting rates, the availability of capital in the e-commerce space, the buying power the consumers have are all tied up in this. I'm going to give you a couple of numbers that I saw just to sort of put this in perspective, and then you tell me what you think of it and see about it. And you're much better at thinking about finance than I am, so you probably will have better perspective here fast. I'm going to set you up just to say that's true. But the inflation peaked in the US over 9% in July 2022. This is the best numbers I could find. But in November, the number I saw was that it was down to 2.7%, and the target inflation rate is 2%, of course, with the Fed starting the year at rates, benchmark rates being between 5.25% and 5.5%, and it's down a full point over the year. So around 4.5% now. That's a pretty big change. Theoretically, it will get cut more. I think Polymarket says that it will get cut more soon, in all likelihood. I could double check that. But you know, as far as like availability of capital, we had this moment in e-commerce where it was like a zero interest rate environment. M&A had slowed down a whole bunch. There's all kinds of implications of this. Where does your mind go with the state of inflation and the Fed and all those things?
Man, you know how to get me hot and bothered right out of the gates here, Mr. Ferris. Inflation, let's talk about it.
Well, it is, and it has to be the biggest story of the year, right? In some ways, like, because it's the thing that affects every brand we deal with.
Oh, it's super important. So inflation is interesting. Obviously, no one knows the future. There's a lot can go on here. And apologies if anyone else caught Bill and Mai's episode and we were talking about this. But you look at
no apologies. Go listen to it.
Yeah, look at Jerome Powell, and he's been huge man crush on him. He has just navigated being Fed chairman so beautifully through. If you look at the U.S. economy, the U.S. economy is ripping relative to almost everywhere else in the world. Stock market is on fire, doing really well. And so you had this last year where you had a couple of cuts with this last year, and a lot of people were thinking, "Hey, it's going to keep happening." I think Powell just this last week, he was like, "Hey." For projecting into 2025, he's saying like, hey, you might get a cut or two, but that's about it. So I think inflation for 2025, if you had to guess, I think it really depends what happens with tariffs and what happens with Trump. And we're going to talk about that here in a minute. Yep. If Trump goes in, if he throws down the gauntlet, and I'm not sure, I think Canada is our biggest trading partner. I could be wrong. Like everyone wants to think it's China. But I think I might want to fact check this, but we import a crazy amount from Canada.
It's enough to be significant. So there you go.
Oh, it's huge. And anyway, so I think a lot of this depends on if Trump is really serious about this, and he's got a track record of throwing stuff down and doing his best to follow through with it. If he's serious about this, or if he's using this as a negotiation to get other concessions and other things. But if I had to predict next year, I would say we're going to see inflation probably stay the same, if not tick up a little bit, is what I would guess.
It's interesting. I mean, what do you think of as the primary impacts specifically for e-commerce operators of both inflation and rate cuts from the Fed. I just checked, by the way. Polymarket says by March, 35% chance that there's a decrease, though it won't put a big number on that. So right now, Polymarket's saying maybe it'll stay for a little while. But anyway, what do you think the biggest impact is?
A couple of things. One, inflation kind of drives rates to some degree. I think it's good and bad. Like if rates do go down, you have inflation, you have rates. The higher inflation goes, a good Fed is going to raise rates to try to get those and cool the economy down and bring inflation down. If you do have inflation, rates go up, that's going to make borrowing costs more expensive, right? So like everything from credit cards to your merchant cash advances to everything's going to get more expensive. But if you're a business owner, you're probably in a better shape than your average kind of like guy on the street or gal on the street because you can raise prices. The thing is, most people don't raise prices enough. Like that's probably the thing that kills people. Prices are going up. You're getting squeezed on your margin from your suppliers, but you're terrified to do it because you have these visions of your business imploding. So if you have the guts and the bravery to do it, it's workable. But I think a lot of people don't until they don't do it enough.
My tactical comment about this is that every time I've ever seen somebody talk about raising prices on their store, I think two things here. Like, first of all, tell everybody you're about to do it. Tell all your customers and tell them what the data is, because that functions like a sale in terms of driving demand, but it actually has the opposite effect in terms of driving brand value, because what you're actually saying is that you're going to charge more for your products, not less, and yet it's still a discount for the customer. So like any fear you have about like discounting and driving negative brand value, you're actually doing the opposite there. You're telling people you're about to charge more for your product while at the same time giving them a discount. So it's kind of a great thing. Secondly, I've actually never, ever seen a mass wave of customers get mad about a price raise. I've never seen it. Operators are very nervous about raising prices, and they're just our customers are going to care so much. They don't care. They're not interested. They actually don't think about your business that much is the thing. So So I think, like, to your point, Darian, like the ability to raise prices or the fact that you should raise prices more often, I think is significant there. Go ahead.
Okay, very quickly, I think also you're spot on, but you can even take that a step further. And when you raise prices, use it as a way to treat your VIPs. Totally. Give them extra love. So maybe you tell your list, hey, we got 10% off, prices rise. Maybe you tell your VIPs, your top 200 customers, we love you, want to take care of you. Not only we're going to give you 10%, but here's a stackable 10 or 15%. Get it before next week because you're awesome. So. Yeah. I do think the availability of capital is a really big deal in our space. Just making it cheaper to finance things like inventory, especially, is a really big deal. And so lower rates is really helpful for that, obviously. I think the other thing is the M&A market, where it's just like for a little while there, capital calls were going basically unanswered from investors, I think. And so it seems to me that there just weren't very many big exits. I wonder if there's more debt available on the side of acquirers of businesses, if that will allow them to go make bigger plays to buy businesses because they can afford to finance their purchases of businesses. So not that they're purchasing all of it with debt, but yeah, it does seem to me there's a real slowdown and a real depressing of business valuations based on the fact that capital got more expensive. So there's two sides. Okay, let's do number 2, totally unrelated to that. Let's go back. Let's go to something a little more narrowly in our space. Let's talk about SendLane breaking on Black Friday. So this was a pretty big story in our space this year, actually, because Klaviyo doubled their prices a couple of years ago, or whenever it was, right? SendLane at the same time was coming up at like half the price, really good service, so far as anybody could tell, was getting big sponsorships, hosting big conferences. They were on the Operators podcast. Sean Frank talked about how much he loves SendLane for a long time. Jimmy Kim, really public guy. And then it broke on Black Friday, the most important day of the year for it to work. And then there's been all kinds of follow-up afterwards and people being very frustrated with SendLane. And the interesting thing about this story to me is not that a piece of software broke at a bad time. That happens reasonably often. But the effect of it outside of this has been that people are nervous and frustrated about the way D2C influencer relationships work. So Darian, you're a D2C influencer. Tell me what you think. I mean, what do you see as you sort of watch this unfold? A couple caveats. One, we've had SendLane as an event sponsor before. So Jimmy and the team they're sponsored. That's just as a disclosure. Number 2, I don't know all the drama. I don't necessarily, I'm not necessarily like digging through all the dirty laundry.
I actually stayed away from it. I don't really care.
Yeah. Apart from but I do think the concept is interesting that you bring up. And I do think I think the thing I will say is I try to have high integrity with the money that we accept and with sponsors that we accept. I know you do too. You're very intentional about that. And I think that also allows content that otherwise wouldn't exist to be able to come out. It allows podcasts and things like that to happen. But nothing will help you understand how money influences your perspective or even your ability to say something or your ability to not say something until you actually are in a position where you are taking money from a third party. Like anyone that says that money does not change how you act, even in a small way, has never taken money from a party and then had any kind of been put in a position where even it was incredibly subtle. And so all that said, I think it is potentially a problem. Like for E-commerce Fuel podcast, one thing that we're doing in the new year, at least by the end of January, is very likely I'm not doing any sponsors for the podcast anymore. Partially for a convenience perspective. Our sponsors in general have been fantastic. And our current sponsor now, Zipify, I have nothing but good things to say about Ezra and the team there. But it is the idea of being able to just say, hey, we, from a podcast perspective, agnostic on the sponsorship side, from a convenience, I think attention spans also are getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, and delivering things to people very quickly without that sponsorship, I think is more valuable. But I think there's a lot of people, like you alluded to, that especially on Twitter, not everyone who should disclose if they're taking money from people do, which I think is it leads to it's a lot of mistrust, I think, in the space.
If you're building a business in e-commerce, whether you're an agency, whether you are an operator, anything like that, you should be considering staffing it with my friends at More Staffing. More Staffing gets you access to the best talent in the Philippines that is possible to get in your business across every part of the business. That includes design, video editing, marketing, supply chain, operations, project management, all of it. Manager, director, executive levels on up. You can really get incredible talent from across the board in the Philippines. And if you're thinking about Philippines staffing as just like $5 an hour virtual assistant, you're thinking about it wrong. There's much more opportunity for you because you can pay top dollar in the Philippines marketplace to get incredible talent that is interested and motivated to work in your business. And at the same time, that salary is still much less than you would pay for that same talent in the US. It is the classic offshoring value proposition. It makes all the sense in the world, and More Staffing makes it easy for you to do that in your business. It's what I've done with my business. They're great people staffing all kinds of parts of all kinds of e-commerce businesses and agency businesses as well. So go check out More Staffing today. They will help you to recruit, train, onboard, and coach talent, and they'll even give you a 1-year guarantee. So if you hire someone with More Staffing and they don't work out for you for a whole year, they will replace that person for no additional recruiting fee. Go to morestaffing.co/AF, morestaffing.co/AF to get started with More Staffing today. The timing of this thing is funny to me. So you're in an interesting spot here because you guys basically don't allow in your community either agencies or software services. Please don't tell the founder of E-commerce Fuel, but I actually don't operate an e-commerce business right now, and I'm still in the community. So just if you can keep that between us.
It's because all the money you're paying me, man.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good point. But I know I'm a rare person there. I know you do allow some of it, right? It's not none, but it's just
very few based on some very specific criteria and legacy members. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Right. And I think even almost anytime I've tried to promote a piece of content of mine, and by promote I just mean link to it in a conversation. For the first couple of times I think I DM'd you and was like, it's okay. I don't want to break the rules. So you guys are really good. So it makes sense to me specifically because it's so important that operators have a place to talk freely. I think that's a really big deal. I think my take on this is just that there's a caveat emptor thing here in terms of buyer beware, right? So I have sponsors in this podcast. I really love them. I think they're great. I think you're completely right that that's colored partly by the fact that they're paying me and I'm not an idiot. I understand. Yeah, I should be honest about that. But I really didn't, I don't think I've ever said anything that I didn't think was true about any of them, I've certainly tried not to, though it is hard when they're paying you. But the thing is, the concern that I actually feel is just that I'll say something and somebody will have a bad experience. because nobody gets their service or product right all the time. And that's not because they're bad at it. It's just because Amazon sometimes doesn't deliver in a day or 2 days or whatever they promise, right? Like, it's just like, no matter how good you are at it, it sometimes breaks. And I think like there's this back and forth here of sort of recognizing that reality. And there's like these polls where like sort of people need to do their diligence on software and on services that they're talking about. They need to take good calls and have a good system for evaluating them. On the other hand, it's funny. I actually wrote a longer tweet about this issue before, like, it happened to be by a coincidence, like a few days before this whole SendLane thing blew up and whatever this influencer kind of conversation has been happening. And it was just saying separately, like, I know people sort of get mad about like shilling, quote unquote, right? And that was the thing you brought up at first is exactly my point, which is like, shilling is really good because what I actually believe is one of the most valuable things in e-commerce is the collective knowledge of the community. I think that's one of the fundamental reasons I'm bullish about e-commerce as a future. The way I keep saying it is like the total intellectual capital on the shared balance sheet of DTC land, right? The total intellectual capital on our balance sheet together is drastically higher than it used to be before. And a lot of that is actually because of shilling. It's because there is an economic incentive for people to share knowledge publicly and to get sponsored for it. And so in that respect, it actually net, I think it's a massive positive in the space. And I know you said something similar, but to me, like, these little moments don't change that for me really at all.
No, I think people understand that sponsors and advertising is kind of is a necessary aspect of getting information in most cases, or at least, people are used to it. It's just the way the world works. I think that what people have a problem with is in small micro communities, which, DTC e-commerce kind of is on the grand scheme of things, having players who are dramatically promoting things without fully being transparent, certainly, if they have financial interest. That I think is so the problem that people have.
Yeah, that I think everybody agrees. And also just like bad content is bad. Like just don't make bad content, like that's another thing, so
I'll get you some bumper stickers that say that.
Thank you. Okay, what's next? You pick one. What should we talk about next?
We got AppLovin. Let's do that. You had that on the list. So
okay.
Yeah, why don't you kick that one off?
Okay, so I mean, the thing about AppLovin is that 35 days ago, if we'd have recorded this episode and said our top stories of 2024 in e-commerce, it would not have made the list because it didn't exist in our space. And it would have been a weird time to make that podcast episode on November 2nd or whatever. But like it basically didn't exist, despite that it's a publicly traded ad network, right? Like, so it's a big company. And then I know actual people who are spending as many dollars during the holiday season on AppLovin as they were, so ads on mobile game networks. Okay. As they were on Meta ads. And I have been very publicly an AppLovin bull. And basically it's because of this. I think in my 10 years in e-commerce, there is no ad channel that has looked as viable, as fast, and as frictionlessly as AppLovin has. It is, and it's because of a bunch of things. Like let's say you want to run YouTube ads. Let's say YouTube is totally viable. There's a huge piece of friction right away, which is that you have to turn your vertical videos into horizontal. And all of these videos that are like, and you probably need like actual VO, not just text on screen, etc. AppLovin allows you to take meta ads that are already working, which is already the number one channel for the vast majority of brands in our space, right? And take those video ads that are working and just plug them in and boom, go. And it is so early. I know there are concerns about it targets too many returning customers, all these things, but there's like high quality traffic coming with high time on site, good metrics. And there are at least some people who, again, didn't even know this channel existed a month ago who are spending $100,000 a day profitably. And so to me, it could be, it's too early to say this too strongly, but this is why I'm a bull. It could be actually the thing that everybody has waited for a long time, which is the sort of like accessible, scalable ad channel aside from Meta. And it could actually bolt right on to Meta in some crazy ways. I don't know a single person who has made a single piece of creative specifically for AppLovin yet, and people are spending $100,000 a day on it. Like, at least some people are. It's crazy.
Man, that's I'm glad you had a lot to say on it, because I had almost no knowledge in the space, so that worked out great. A couple questions for you. There's been a tiny bit of talk in ECF about it, but not a ton. Although maybe, granted, it's a month old in terms of impact. That's probably reasonable.
And it's gated, right? You have to have been spending 20 grand a day on Meta. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, is this one of those things where it's like TikTok, you have a handful of people who are positioned well, invested in the right place, and they're just harvesting these massive gains based on hard work and really good brand positioning and network positioning? Or are you seeing you're in the space, 2 or 3 people doing really well? Or are you seeing, and hearing of a meaningful number of people, 50% of people who hop on here and try it within 10 hours are just rocking it and loving it?
Probably depends what you mean by doing really well. So I have one client on it that was getting a 10 to 15% lift in spend right away. It's possible we could have gone bigger there. I'm not sure. But we were just, really trying to protect profitability at the time, even while games. So we just weren't inclined to go super risky. But I'll say even that, a 10 or 15% lift in spend profitably, essentially on day one, is a very big deal. So if it even creates 10 to 20% lift, even if it's not quite meta scale, then there's that. So I think there are brands, and I think there are also brands that clearly are better suited for it. And the brands that are better suited for it are anybody whose product works especially well with older women. Now, the thing is, that's almost everybody. Those are the people with the purse strings in e-commerce, disproportionately. And that because it is older women disproportionately playing, it's like games like Candy Crush and stuff like that. That's who is overwhelmingly on the platform. And then the other thing is, it's brands that, at least today, don't need to have very hard exclusions of existing customers, because right now you can't exclude existing customers from your ad. So the people who are most frustrated are like, the performance looks pretty good. And even with incrementality studies, it looks pretty good, except that it's targeting too many returning customers because you can't exclude them. And so if you think about Cody Plofker's in public about this with Jones Road Beauty, right? It's like makeup, you can destroy your cohort values by spending too much money on past customers. And it can be a real, you want to spend a different amount of money to sort of acquire or reacquire customers. But beyond that, I will say that it is only a few people doing really well, but that's also because it's only available to a few people. So we'll see what happens when they open it up, which apparently is Q1, Q2.
Cool. The thing that got all the ecom folks super excited before Black Friday comes out. Yeah, interesting story. And I was going to ask you too, when you say a 10% lift in spend, do you mean they were able to increase their overall ad spend by 10 to 15% at a similar return? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. So if they were spending 100,000, they were able to spend 10 to 15 more, and it would have been at the same return. Yeah. Got it.
Interesting. Great. Yeah. Should we talk about AI?
Yeah, let's do it. I think this is the year that AI took off, right? I feel like the first real public thing I saw about people talking about AI with a lot of enthusiasm in the e-commerce space, besides a couple sort of dreamer types, was Bill D'Alessandro talking about it at ECF Live at some point. So I don't know, what's your take on the rise of AI? It just seems like it's gone to new heights this year and is primed to go crazy next year.
It's interesting. I think AI had an amazing year because this is we're 2 years out, I believe, from when ChatGPT dropped, almost exactly. So it dropped, everyone went bananas, rightfully so. And then I feel like you had 6 months of where a lot happened. A lot of people were really just understanding some of the use cases. And then you had a 12 to 18 months of where there's more promise than I think there was really operational efficiencies. You have some things with some customer service. You have some things that are making businesses more effective on the back end. But I also, the other day, I went and I used, is it Sora? Is that the new video platform? And I went and tried that out. And it was cool. It was kind of cool, but also the results were cringeworthy, right? I didn't play with it a lot. But at the same time, I know. So I think I don't think it's the promised land yet in terms of just being able to feed AI something and have it run your brand for you from creative to everything. That said, I am in ChatGPT 7, 8, 9, 10 times a day. I am talking to it about everything. Questions about life, major decisions, developing property, things about how do you brew good coffee, business decisions. And it has become a confidant of, which sounds super creepy. I sound like I'm in that movie where the guy falls in love with the robot, and maybe I am. I maybe need help. But the power of having if you were using it in the way for brainstorming, for creativity, for copy, for decision making as a partner to think through problems. It's phenomenal. And I think this next 2 or 3 years, we'll see those gains catch up in the operational side of things. So I think there's a laggard on like the really fancy stuff, but the good stuff that's kind of boring, but super helpful, I think is wildly transformative if you use it.
Yeah, I think there's a question of leverage versus magic. I think if you're looking for magic, it's not that yet. I think if you're looking for leverage, it is that.
Yes.
And I think I have 2 clients who are pretty AI forward, and I think Chris Kresser came on your podcast and talked about this with you some, maybe. Yeah, from Adapt Natural. So he's a client of mine, and he is like, he the other day spun out like an advertorial style lander and a bunch of ad copy with sort of like, because his product is supplements in the health space, like it requires some technical knowledge because there's sort of this medicinal element of it. He was a practicing clinician for a long time, so. So he's more involved in some of the script writing process for some of our explainer stuff than some of my other clients, because you just have to have deep knowledge of the medical subject matter. People. So
yeah,
right, exactly, yeah, or claim something crazy, yeah. Anyway, he like spun out like 8 explainer ads and a long form advertorial lander, I think in like an hour or something like that. Like it maybe less time than that, probably half an hour. Like he's just so fast at it. And it's because he's so good at using it like that. And I think that's what I'm seeing more of. It's just like people building stuff that's pretty crazy. AI avatars and ads, like some of those things are real. I have a client who's building AI avatars for ads, and they're getting 50% of our spend with a 6-figure spend per month, probably like low mid 6-figure spend, like they're just growing all the time. So there's definitely a lot of those applications that I think are going to continue to do that. And here's my little like bear case prediction with AI. I think it's possible that there's like a looming crisis of trust that actually kind of blows up some people's use of it. On the one hand, I think people are going to do what you just described, which is they're going to get really good at using it as a second brain. On the other hand, I could also imagine consumers going like I could just imagine something happening that makes people, I'm not talking about like a Matrix scenario here. I'm just talking about something that people go like, ugh, they just kind of have some kind of reaction. And listen, I don't think that'll be a forever thing. I think if that happens, it'll just be a part of the thing that needs to get solved. But I could just imagine that doing something in a way that messed with something. I could sort of imagine brands saying made without AI the same way they say made in the USA, which is like, it maybe makes it more expensive. It doesn't mean necessarily even that it's better, but it's just kind of a badge of honor. You're running Meta ads, you're tracking them with some kind of software, whether that's Shopify's native integration or with third-party software, and you should be doing it, tracking all your events on your website with BILY. It's BILY.ai. BILY is what I use with my clients for the best quality ad tracking in the game. That means the highest event match quality scores in Meta's Event Manager. That means when I test it head-to-head against Shopify's native integration or other tools, I get a higher return on my ad spend, which is really good news because it's just done by better tracking, which means basically that Meta is getting the best data from your ads, from your website back to Meta so that it can optimize as best as possible. Go check it out today, BILY.ai, to get started with the best Meta ads tracking available today.
Absolutely. I think we will 100% see that. It's almost like the NFT the NFT craze kind of blew up for weird reasons, but I always thought that would be an interesting way to be able to have almost a digital stamp from somebody to say, I created this content. This was authentically me. I'm saying that this is a genuine piece from a human. Spot on. I think you're spot on.
You and I think, have some different perspective on whether or not this is a good year for brands or a bad year for brands and what the future holds. Let's do your negative Nancy perspective first, and then we'll do my optimistic rosy outlook one. You think that one of the top stories this year is that there has been difficulty in building real brands, and that owners are struggling. Now, you actually have a way better perspective on this than I do because of precisely the job you have. So tell me what you mean by that.
Yeah. I was prepping for this for the 7.5 minutes I had for prep. Thank you very much. I went into the community and just kind of looked at the top discussions over the past year, and obviously it's a confidential community, so I'm not going to name specifics or get into any weeds. But there's always, anytime you get 1,000 entrepreneurs talking about what's going on, you're gonna have some stories pop up. But I feel like there was just a number of more stories than average of people who were going out and trying to build a brand the right way. Amazing product, deeply innovative, marketing it, and building a genuine brand around it with high quality creative advertising, original content, and how hard that was. And other people just going through just some of this, being open and honest about the psychological difficulties of running a business. And I think that just stood out to me. It's just e-commerce has been hard for different reasons. Post COVID, there was people spent a ton of money during COVID operation. It was hard to make that work. And then you kind of had the post COVID spend and hangover. And this year I feel just e-commerce is maturing in a lot of new ways. The game is changing. And I think I've talked about this a lot on my podcast, the idea of a smaller, more durable brand. I think the type of e-commerce brands that stay around in 5 years are going to be generally smaller, generally more durable, built the old-fashioned way with a lot of empathy from the owners towards their customers. And they're going to be more valuable because they're going to be stickier, but they're going to be harder to build. So yeah, I think you had the case, I know, negative Nancy here, but I think e-commerce, the way we think about it, is harder, much harder than it was even a couple of years ago. But I think the ability to create enduring brands, if you put in the work, is at an all-time high. So,
yeah, I actually don't disagree with any of that. I mean, I think the psychological tool is real. I think entrepreneurs are like that, for one thing. The people you're selecting for a group of people who try to go do something really hard. I think anybody who thinks it's easy is just ridiculous. It's hard on a lot of levels. But the reason that I'm the rosy optimistic one here is that it seems to me that while that is a true and real thing you just described, and this will always have an uneven set of results, there are just more good quality big brands now than there have ever been in my time in e-commerce. And there's all kinds of reasons why that's an optimistic thing, but it just strikes me that. Let me ask you a question. You have a specific 8-figure subsection, 8-figure plus subsection of ECF, yes. I believe. You don't have to give exact numbers here, but over the last year or two, to the best of your knowledge, would you say that community has been flat, 10% growth, 50% growth, 100% growth? How many more brands are getting past the 8-figure threshold than before?
Let me put it this way. And again, being sensitive to confidentiality, we do an event every year for our 8-figure plus and 9-figure sellers, of which we have a handful. We'll often break out into subgroups to talk about things and masterminds. And one thing we have noticed is that the brands that are larger have been doing better and growing faster. The brands that are smaller in the 8-figure subcategory have been having a harder time. And it's difficult to say, well, is that just a selection bias, right? The ones that are doing better get bigger, therefore they self-select in that larger group. One possibility. It's also possible to say the bigger you are, and I think there's also a very strong case for this, as e-commerce gets more difficult, as attention gets harder to buy, being a larger player in the space means that you have a larger competitive advantage because you have more emails, you have more SMS, you have more brand equity that you don't have to go. You already paid the cheaper toll and now you're in. It's the same effect that applies to tech, right? You have four. So I think that's what I'm seeing in that group.
Yeah, isn't that also though an argument against what you said about the slower, more durable brand? That sounds like an argument to try to make your brand bigger and faster so you get more of a moat.
It is, yes, but I think it's more difficult to do. So I think both can be true. Okay. You can have the group. You can have the group of horses that are ahead on the racetrack, but to get ahead, if you're there, it's you're going to be able to stay ahead because your horses are stronger. But it's harder to get there if you're starting out from scratch or if you're kind of in the early phases.
Yeah. The reason I'm looking at it this way is in my time in e-commerce, part of this is just inflation. Part of this is time. These things create larger numbers, but it just seems to me the story I always tell is I remember the first time, and I can name the brand because it was so long ago, it doesn't even matter. The first time I saw Diff Eyewears in Google Analytics, and I think it was when they'd, been 10 or 20 million or something like that. I was working with them when I was at Common Thread Collective. They're way bigger than that now. I have no idea exactly how big they are, but they're a really good, bigger business. And I was amazed at their Google Analytics account. It was I don't know if I'd ever seen an 8-figure store before besides the North Face or something, legacy brand that had added D2C later in their life stage. And now I see I have 5 8-figure clients out of 6 clients, basically, and they're varying sizes of 8 figures. They're varying levels of omni-channel versus D2C only and something like that, and so it's just it just seems to me that there are just more big brands. And actually the way I would frame the sort of like 2024 story element of it is what I would call like the rise of the new 9-figure e-commerce brand. And so it's like I just noticed this year that like there are now these are not all new this year, but there's more awareness and public thing of profitable 9-figure e-commerce brands. If you think of like e-commerce version 1, e-commerce 1.0 as like the Warby Parker stage, Bonobos, all those guys, venture backed, never profitable, grew really fast, IPO'd and cashed out, and then were horrible stocks to buy or P&G acquisitions, right? Like just horrible, lost all their value because it turns out e-commerce doesn't scale that way. That came back, and I think there's still some tension where there's still a rubber band effect where people are trying to play by the old rules and stuff, but almost nobody that I see anymore is really trying to play by those rules anymore. Like venture money's gone. You can't even get it. And so it's like, so the thing that strikes me is that there are now a bunch of big businesses that are really profitable and really valuable in our space. And they have now taken over. And so I think that's sort of the marker that this is the year we are at, like, e-commerce 2.0. Now they're mostly omni-channel. Actually, they're not D2C pure play. But I mean, I just did an interview last week with guys from Baseball Lifestyle. They're talking about getting to 9 figures in 2 years up from 7 figures or something like that. Like now that's an extreme edge case example where they had years and years and years of growing a social following. It's a really good interview, and they did that with mass retail distribution and some of those things. But it's just like, yeah, I just feel like they're profitable. It's a story that I've seen now. And maybe part of it is just because of the publicity of like the operators and marketing operators podcasts where you're seeing into their businesses in a way you didn't before. But it just seems to me that there's a wave of businesses in our space that are bigger and more durable than there used to be. And it's a striking thing to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, that all makes sense. Don't have a ton to add, but I think the one thing I would say is the baseball ones that you mentioned, they had done, to my point, they didn't grow
years. Yeah.
They didn't grow based on scaling up with Facebook ads. 3 years ago, a lot of the big brands were like, hey, let's just, if you have the money, let's put every cent into building more awareness, more market share, and then we'll figure out profitability when we slow down growth, when we hit 9 figures. Yeah. Sounds like this crew, they did it the old fashioned way. Like I was talking about, that's what enabled their jump to light speed.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. I mean, they didn't build that brand overnight at all. They didn't do it in 2 years. They did it in 10, but they just made the revenue jump in 2. Okay, let's go back to some macroeconomics. Let's do let's do tariff stuff. This is what the people really want. They want to hear about tariffs. All right. So start with de minimis going away. Before we jump into, I don't know, do you want to do President Trump first, or do you want to do de minimis?
Andrew, this is your podcast. I defer to you, my friend. So what do you say?
Okay, well, let's do de minimis first, because I didn't know what that was until you brought it up. And so you should explain de minimis going away. What is it? Why is it a big deal? This is one of those things that actually, once you talked about it to me, it's like, that is a big story in e-commerce for this year.
Yeah. And again, hope I get all the details here correct. I think I've got the broad strokes correct. But if you're importing things, de minimis is this idea that for a long time in the US, if you imported something into the US or shipped it in that was under $800 in value, it was exempt from tariffs, which was problematic because a lot of Western sellers, if they're importing from China in bulk and then reselling, they would pay full tariffs on everything, whereas sellers from Asia could send things in 1, 2 at a time, maybe through ePacket or something, and wouldn't have to pay those fees. So it didn't make for a totally level playing field. I don't know if this has been implemented yet. If it hasn't, I believe it will be shortly, but I think it might already be in place with Biden's executive order. Pretty much got rid of that. So saying, hey, everything coming in now, no matter what, is going to be, you have to pay tariffs, and you may also have to pay an additional $2 per package to be able to bump up some of those things coming in on things like Alibaba, Shin, things like that. So that's what de minimis is. Does
that affect like a U.S. seller manufacturing in China and importing from there?
Probably less so, because most of those people doing that are not going to be shipping in at onesie twosie. Some of them might, but probably most of them are going to be ordering, manufacturing their products in China, bringing them in by containers, and they've always paid containers. So really, it doesn't affect most Western sellers or U.S. sellers, but it is going to at least do something to reduce the imbalance and margin. Because before people,
just Chinese sellers, is the Tmos of the people using this, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Because I tweeted and said, give me some topics for this, and people wanted to talk Temu and Shein and stuff like that. And yeah, interesting. Okay, so that is interesting. Do you think that's why there's been a reduction in ad spend from those people, so far as I can tell, and a reduction of presence, like just that there's sort of a arbitrage advantage going away. Do you have any idea about that?
Do you mean a reduction in ad spend from sellers in China, or what do you mean?
Yeah, well, like I've seen some stuff. I'm thinking of Temu specifically here that like they had backed out their ad spend, where it was extremely aggressive at one point, has maybe backed off, and I'm wondering if you think that has anything to do with it. If there's an arbitrage advantage has gone away, and this is speculation, but
I have no idea. It's unfortunately past my. I know they were spending like crazy to buy market share. That could have had an impact on it, but I don't know. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk about the other side of the tariff coin, which is President Trump gets elected. That's the 2024 story. That is an e-commerce story, and it's an e-commerce story because he immediately threatened tariffs with 25% with Mexico and Canada. And then I don't know if he'd put a number on China tariffs, but obviously lots of rhetoric around U.S. manufacturing and some of those things. It was a major point in the campaign. I don't have to tell you that if you're listening to this podcast. But it is interesting to me to think about sort of what this does mean for e-commerce. I have recent Polymarket numbers on this because I think that's the best way to judge what we think is possible. Because one of the things I saw right away was like, is this actually going to happen? Because apparently President Trump had threatened such things before his first term, that there would be some kind of tariffs, and then didn't actually do it. It was just like a negotiating lever, like you alluded to earlier, Darian. So Polymarket right now says a 40% tariff on China has an 18% chance. A 25% tariff on Mexico and Canada is currently, the Polymarket odds right now are 35%. So both, 1 in 3 is not nothing for Mexico and Canada. 1 in 5 for 40% China is definitely a lot lower. And then this is like I don't know how this is defined exactly, but large tariffs in the first 6 months of the presidency is at a 36% likelihood. Polymarket, I think, is just a nice way to get some probabilistic numbers on something like this. So I don't know, maybe you want to, I don't know how much you talked about this, Bill. I'm assuming you did some. I haven't listened to that podcast episode yet. You do a predictions episode every year with Bill D'Alessandro. So yeah, give me your reaction to tariffs in the U.S.
This is so crazy. It's so weird. So the first thing I think about when I look at this, and I could be wrong, I thought the proposed, and maybe this is a little old news, but when I remember Trump talking about it recently, I thought he said 10% China, 10% tariffs on China, and Mexico and Canada 35%. My first thought was, that seems backwards from what the rhetoric often would imply. And that made me kind of, okay, that's weird. The other thing, if you look at Mexico and Canada, I can see, again, from a rhetoric perspective, using, especially from as a lever to try to help control the border, control some trade policies, things like that. Slapping a larger tariff on Mexico, the border is much more of an issue there. But to put a 25% tariff on Canada, one of our closest allies, where we've got tons of, I think I was doing a very rough research, and again, probably fact check me here. I think maybe Canada tariffs imposes a little bit more tariff heavy than the U.S., but not dramatically. But that just seems so weird to me. So that was my first impression on that. I'd be shocked if we did that. I would be very surprised if that happened. Secondly, Trump is one of his big things, like, presents himself business forward guy. The stock market is an important gauge for success for him and how he is running the country, a scoreboard of sorts. And if you put tariffs on, those are massively inflationary. Maybe they take a little while to come in, but I think any tariffs would be moderated or muted, because otherwise he's kind of shooting himself in the foot in terms of inflation, the economics, market dynamics, and he's going to pay for it on the back end. I think he's probably smart enough to know that. So those are my thoughts on tariffs.
For when he runs for his third term. You never know. You never know. I mean, it's just funny. It's like one of those things that economists seem to pretty universally hate, and that like politicians like to use as a club.
Yes.
I mean, again, this is going to get past my depth of knowledge on macroeconomic theory a little bit, but yeah, I mean, I think it could be a really big deal. This is where it's sort of too early to tell, but I think it is possible that margins get seriously squeezed quickly. And your point about it being inflationary, I'm working on, I've mentioned a couple of times, I'm starting to work on spinning up a brand. I haven't talked about what that brand is yet, but there was a possibility that we'd have a manufacturer in Canada. And so I immediately went into my unit economics sheet that
immediately
I
called
this.
Trump.
Yeah. I said, buddy, come on. My business is going to do like probably $1 million someday. So
if you want any continuing contributions from Andrew Ferris, you're going to kill these immediately.
Forget contributions, just my tax dollars. Anyway, it was like my immediate thing I did is I went and was like, oh, I guess I'll have to raise the price. And it's just like, I could just feel in my instinct right there, the cries of 1,000 economists being like, that is all you're going to do if this happens. It's just like, yeah. I mean, it's TBD. I think actually it's sort of the most interesting thing about the story in my view right now is that the strength of President Trump's language is so different than the weighted odds from Polymarket. Like that sort of is striking to me as a picture of the story.
Well, I think one of the things that's super weird too is about, and again, to keep this apolitical and just talk about just raw behaviors.
Totally, yeah.
Let's jump down to TikTok getting banned, right? Like you were saying, Polymarket has a 32% chance of it getting banned.
Yeah.
Again, if you would look at Trump's rhetoric, very anti-China, China's abusing us, rah. If you look at the bill that went through the U.S. Congress, it was a wildly popular bill, bipartisan bill, to say, hey, TikTok is a national interest, national security interest issue. It's got to be divested. It can't be owned by a company with ties to the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah.
Donald Trump was also in that camp, but until recently, when he thought that TikTok to help him get elected, or he had a lot of followers there for whatever reason, he has changed his tune a bit to soften to this app that is considered by Democrats and Republicans across the board as a viable security, which just right. So my point being, there's a lot of emotional and unexpected things that could happen that aren't necessarily purely policy driven, which I think makes it more complicated on the tariff front.
Yeah, I could not agree more. There's a bunch of layers of that. I'm tempted to go down some political opinion route, but I'm going to withhold that because we don't have time for it anyway. You did bait me. Part of the reason TikTok may not get banned, of course, is just that there's another out, which is that it is sold to the U.S. To a company in the U.S. So whatever. I wonder if the odds are like go up if it's like force a sale or get banned versus just get banned, because there's sort of the potential out.
It'll be fascinating to see. It does not look like they are, and again, we're recording this like December 19th, but it doesn't look like they are entertaining offers at this point. So it'll be super interesting to see how that plays out.
All right. Let's do a quick couple rapid fires. We only got a couple minutes left. And so I've got a few other thoughts in mind. Let's see. Why don't you start? What's just something that you see that you can do a couple sentences on, and we can just do some rapid fire here?
Yeah, you've got these two like wildly, esoteric ad spend ones that I'm not even going to touch with a 10-foot pole here. I'll leave those for you. We'll go with mine.
It's my bailiwick.
That is. I'll throw mine in here. This year I saw a increase, and not a wild one. It wasn't like I saw, just hundreds of people doing this, but a noticeable increase anecdotally of people buying back their businesses. A handful, 2 or 3 from rebuying it back from private equity, someone buying it back from an operator who had ran it for 10 years and then just, kind of didn't maximize. But I thought it was very interesting. And it just stood out to me. And I think part of it just kind of speaks to the era of when you had aggregators and all these roll-up funds buying companies like crazy, finding out it was harder than they thought. Oh, hey, we can't operate 50 disparate brands, with economies of scale. Didn't work quite out like we penciled it on the whiteboard.
Yeah, like 4x400.
So I thought that was, I
ran one of them.
Yeah. But I also thought it was interesting that some of the deals people got, what's the only thing better than buying a business for 80% off market? Buying a business for 80% off market that you ran for 5 years and know inside and out.
And that you made the market price for in the first place?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And you pretty much, free business more or less. So,
right. That's really awesome. Okay. I'll do I kind of only have this one on the list. Attribution is out and incrementality is in. This is a little bit of an unfair way to say it because people are still using their attribution tools. But for a little while there, all anybody was talking about was attribution tools, especially post iOS 14.5. Triple Whale came on the scene, Northbeam. These things didn't exist for a little while there. Now I hear people reference their attribution tools, but almost nobody talks about it as like this big value add anymore. They reference their MTAs and their MMMs and all this, and that's fine. But it's just not the thing that it was. Maybe because it's become old hat and standard fare and everybody uses it. But I actually think it's because what people realize is that incrementality testing is a much better way to measure the effectiveness of your ads than an MTA or an MMM. And that has been, I think, a big story this year, that incrementality testing has really gone to the mainstream with House and Measured being the leaders of that. It's too expensive still for brands anywhere on the like low 8-figure side of things. So this is also maybe partly just because brands are getting bigger, at least at some place. But incrementality testing, I mean, some of these tools are really crazy. And the idea of really being able to measure the incrementality of your ad spend in precise ways, including its value on Amazon and some of those things, is just one of the most noticeable conversations I've seen this year. There's confusion around it. It's valuable. At the same time, you're seeing smart people talk about it in a lot of ways.
So for schmucks like myself who are not in the paid world, can you break this down in 30 seconds? Incrementality, is this the idea of, hey, you have tools that can let you almost like split test ad spend in different...
Yeah, run holdout tests basically, so that you can actually see like not just like which ad channel gets credit and what kind of credit for a purchase, but it's not so much that just as so much as saying like, does the ad actually generate revenue that you were not going to get otherwise, and how much relative to like the reported ROAS in the platform. So it's a slight distinction from assigning credit by channel, because it's really more about like, did the channel create clearly incremental value despite no matter how you sort of gave any particular channel credit. And that is coming with like more scientific testing that is a more robust methodology. And so I think there are like mountains of problems with the way people think about attribution. Mostly, I think it's like not actually as true as people think it is. And incrementality strikes me as a much more viable way to think about this. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Okay. What else you got?
Last one, I have a ton of thoughts on PMax just being terrible. But I'd like to hear what you think about this first, Andrew.
You don't want to do YouTube over TikTok?
See, what's that? Oh, that's right. We should do that one. I didn't. Where is that? There it was. It was below the folder. Yeah. So this one, and again, I'm not a massive, definitely not a massive creator on either of these, but from talking to people, seeing trends, it seems like TikTok was so on fire, 18 months ago, even 12 months ago, but it seems like that surprisingly, YouTube is winning maybe the war in terms of incentives for creators, because it seems like they pay more to creators in terms of the ad share, and they're just economically it's more valuable to be on YouTube. And a second point that I just want to point out, we were giving love to like, Jerome, the Fed chair, which how often do you hear about people talk about their man crush for Jerome Powell? But I also like think about how many platforms have been around for YouTube. What's 2005-ish launched? It's been around for 20 years, and in a highly relevant way. Even Facebook, Instagram, Facebook, and Meta has had its channels that have kind of aged in different ways and different return profiles. Twitter as well, but I just feel like YouTube is such an OG that is still kicking, and not even just around, but just thriving and a preeminent source online for content for search. It's impressive. Yeah,
I agree with that. I mean, partly just the point that YouTube, if you're on YouTube, it's like you're spending a lot more time with somebody than you are on TikTok. So, all right, I'll do two very last ones really quick. One of them is PMax. Tried to scoop me, can't do it. PMax sucks. Performance Max ads on Google Ads looked for a minute there like it could be a competitor to be a place, like I was saying about AppLovin, like get a bunch of D2C spend, and it isn't. It sucks. It's a mess. It's hard to test. It's hard to see if it's working. Incrementality tests that people are doing showing that it is way less incremental than the ROAS number. It just looks like a non-viable channel to me for ad growth, which is a big deal because people need ad channels that work and they would love for them to be there besides Meta. The other one I'll say, and this is for anybody who listens to my podcast, they're not going to, I have no way of measuring this, but it seems to me that there is a massive increase in the adoption of manual bids on Meta ads. This is highly specific, but I think it seems to me that it's becoming standard practice, which is making it more efficient for people to spend their dollars. It's just interesting. It's a real shift in the way people buy ads. And I think certainly I've been a vocal proponent of that. Taylor Holiday and CTC, they buy all their stuff that way. They've grown a bunch, which is by definition, that means they've got more people spending on those things. Kinship, they do it the same way. They've grown a bunch. Like, there's just more and more, it looks like that's the way people are going to go forward with buying ads. And I think it's good.
Andrew, you said exactly what I was going to say about manual bids and PMAX. Like, to the T.
That's why I didn't ask you a question. I knew you and I were in lockstep on this. Yeah,
I can't add a thing. That was
yeah. All right, man. Thanks for your time. I appreciate this so much, especially for being a last minute call here. This is a fun one to do. Everybody go join E-commerce Fuel. Follow you, Darren, on Twitter, all the spots. Yeah, man. Merry Christmas.
Hey, Merry Christmas. Happy holidays, everyone. And this was a lot of fun. Thanks for the invite, Andrew.
Thanks, man. Huge thanks to Andrew Youderian for joining me for that episode. That was a really fun one to just kick that stuff around. I would love to hear your top stories, so email them to me at podcast@ajfgrowth.com. Reach out to me on Twitter @AndrewJFerris. That's my name. Go to ajfgrowth.com to see everything I'm doing, and don't forget to subscribe wherever you're watching or listening to this. Do go check out Andrew's podcast and community as well. It's great. E-commerce Fuel is the community. The E-commerce Fuel podcast is the podcast. It was the first podcast in e-commerce that I ever listened to. It's just really good. All the time. So thanks again to my sponsors, BILY and More Staffing. They are great. Go check them out as well. I will see you next time.